If you have your Bibles, we are going to continue in 1 Kings. So if you want to go ahead and start turning there, we're going to start off with chapter 18. And so as you're moving there and getting there, let me just kind of give you a little bit of where we were last week and then kind of what has happened between last week with Solomon and where we are now. Last week, Solomon was building the temple, and we dedicate the temple, and we looked at the Holy of Holies. And then from there, chapter 11, Solomon passes away. And after Solomon passes away, by chapter 12, the kingdom splits into two. So we have a northern kingdom and we have a southern kingdom. And the southern kingdom is continued to be ruled by the heirs of King David. But the northern kingdom, their rulers they're just a mess. All of the rulers, none of them are good. And if you go through and you read about the northern kingdom, it is a story of coups and a story of political instability. The northern kingdom is just a mess. Southern kingdom's not super great, but the northern kingdom is just an absolute mess. And so we move into chapter 18, and the story we're going to pick up with the story of Elijah. Elijah was a prophet in the northern kingdom. The king at the time that we're going to see is King Ahab. Most of us might be familiar with King Ahab, but we are probably more familiar with King Ahab's wife, Jezebel. And so we're going to be looking at some of the story of King Ahab and his wonderful wife. There's a lot of sarcasm in that. Jezebel. And so there we are in the northern kingdom. And in the northern kingdom, they do not worship the one true God, the creator of all. They worship the God of the Phoenicians and the God of the Canaanites, that God's name was Baal. And so this week, that's kind of where we pick up. Now, we're going to be looking primarily at chapter 19, but chapter 19 doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if you don't look at chapter 18 first. And chapter 18 is one of the most famous stories in Elijah's life. And so we're going to look at that. And so I'm going to kind of just go through and give you kind of some highlights. We're not going to read the entire story. So chapter 18, verse 20, this is where we pick up this story. So Ahab, who is the king, summoned all the Israelites and gathered the prophets at Mount Carmel. Then Elijah approached all the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions?" So Elijah is talking to the prophets, talking to all the people. How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, follow him. And the people didn't answer him a word. Just quiet. Now, this isn't really what the sermon is about. However, I think this is one of those passages that we kind of have to stop and at least ask the question. Elijah has asked a question of the people, and so I think it is appropriate that we today too at least entertain the question. How long? How long will you waver between two opinions? Here are your options. If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, or today I'll just put a blank there, follow him. And my question to you this morning is, what are you tempted to fill in this blank with? And I think all of us are tempted with something, and some of us are, as we're going to see, Elijah seems to be a little self-righteous. Some of us will say, well, oh, no, I don't ever fill in the blank with something else. It's those other people that do that. But I think we so often do that. Back at the end of July, if you remember, I preached a sermon where we talked about idols, and I had tables up here, and I went through idols. Some of the idols are the idols that I went through that day, which I think are all options for us to fill in this blank. I talked about the idol of success and career, the idol of technology, or I think really even the better way for us in our world to understand it, the idol of distraction, the idol of money or security, the idol of the image of self, The idol of relationship or romance, and that one seems a little odd. If you remember, I said that day, it's not about, relationships aren't bad, obviously. But when we think it takes someone else to complete us, then that relationship can become an idol. The idol of comfort and control. The idol of ourselves, which this is one that we see in our culture, an idol that says that I am my own God or I am my own truth. The idol of time or busyness, one that we all struggle with, especially this time of year. The idol of religion, being that sometimes we think that it's ourselves that save ourselves. How good of a person can I be? And if I'm a good enough person, I can save myself instead of allowing God to be the one that saves us. That Sunday, it was July 27th, that's where I ended. And then if y'all remember, I got multiple phone calls that week because I left a very important idol off. I was trying to only kind of step on toes, but I had quite a few people that did not feel fully stepped upon that day. So I had to come back the next week and brought another idol that we struggle with, especially this time of year, the idol of sports, or in Alabama, the idol of football. And yesterday, I was running, and 11 o'clock was the Vanderbilt game came on, and the first possession of the game, Texas scored 75 yards, and it just did something to my insides, and so I had to turn it off because I didn't like it. I didn't want to be all turned around on my insides because Vanderbilt was just being Vanderbilt. It's what they do. But we thought there was a little glimmer of hope there that those of us that grew up as Vanderbilt fans thought there might be something, but I didn't like what it did to me. And I think we deal with that fill in the blank. These things that just kind of grab a hold of us. And so today, Elijah, I think, would ask us the question, if the Lord is God, follow him. But if it's something else, then follow him or it. And the people all proclaim together, we will follow God. No. What did they say? But the people didn't answer him a word. So that's the story that we have. And so if you remember the story, this is kind of what happens next in the story is that there's all of this kind of, there's this kind of showdown that happens between the prophets of Baal and Elijah being the only prophet of the one true God. And so they have this kind of showdown, and he says, all right, we're going to have the sacrifice, and if your God can light the sacrifice, then your God is true. And if my God can light the sacrifice, then my God is true. And so we pick up the story there in verse 27, says at noon, Elijah mocked them. They've been trying all day. Elijah just couldn't control himself. So Elijah mocks them. He said, shout loudly, for he's a God. Maybe he's thinking it over. Maybe he's wandered away. Maybe he's traveling. He's on the road. Perhaps, maybe, he's asleep, and you need to wake him up. So what did the prophets do? It's a little funny. They were like, that's a good idea, Elijah. You might be right. So they shouted loudly, and they cut themselves with knives and spears according to their custom until blood gushed all over them. Verse 29, all afternoon they kept raving until the offering of the evening sacrifice, but there was no sound. No one answered. No one paid attention. Now, I'll preach this sermon some other time, but there's another sermon here. The people were silent, weren't they? When Elijah asked them their question. If he's God, follow him. Or if Baal is God, follow him. And the people were silent. And then here again, now who's silent? Baal. The gods are silent, or the God is silent. So that's where we kind of pick up this, or that's where the story is. And then we could go through the story. If you remember, they never answer. So then Elijah says, all right, we're going to make this a little harder. We're going to dig trenches around. They created an altar, 12 stones. We're going to dig trenches around this altar. We're going to just fill it up with water. So they pour water all over their sacrifice. And then Elijah's like, you know what? That's not good enough. Let's put some more water. So they do it a second time. And then he's like, that's still not good enough. Third time, they completely drench every single thing with water. The moat that they had dug around the altar is filled up with water. And then what does Elijah do? Elijah cries out to God. Verse 37 there says, still in chapter 18, verse 37 says, answer me, O Lord, answer me so that this people will know that you, the Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Verse 38, the Lord's fire fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was around the trench. When all the people saw it, they fell face down and said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. So this is kind of where this story pretty much ends. Now, from this story, if you remember, Elijah says, okay, we've got all of these other prophets, 350 of them. We're going to take them down to this valley. They just completely kill all of these other prophets. Not a good sign, or not a good time, but they kill all of them. And then from there, we turn into chapter 19. So Elijah has killed all the false prophets, the prophets of Baal. And so chapter 19, this is our passage for the day. Chapter 19, verse 1, we're going to go kind of slowly through it. But starting off with verse 1, Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, may the gods punish me and do so severely if I don't make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. So what does Jezebel do? She pretty much puts out a hit on Elijah. Now remember, Jezebel serving the god Baal. Elijah serving the one true God, the God who brings fire down from heaven. So, what does he do? Verse 3, then Elijah became afraid and immediately ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba, that belonged to Judah, he left his servant there. Verse 4, but he went on a day's journey into the wilderness. He sat down under a broom tree and prayed that he might die. He said, I have had enough, Lord, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. So what does he do? He just gives up. He gives up. Then, verse 5, then he lay down and slept under the broom tree. Suddenly an angel touched him. The angel told him, get up and eat. He looked, and there at his head was a loaf of bread baked over hot stones and a jug of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again, exhausted. Verse 7, then the angel of the Lord returned for a second time, touched him and said, get up, or your journey will be too much for you. He got up. He ate, he drank. Then on the strength from that food, he walked 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, let's just talk about what happened. So he gets this death threat from Jezebel. He runs a day's journey. Then he stops under this tree. He stops under the broom tree. Then he falls asleep. The angel shows up. The angel gives him food. And then he takes off. Now, I know you all love maps, so let's have a little fun with the map. So we have here's a map of Israel back in that time. And so I put a little circle around Mount Carmel. So that little kind of thing that juts out, that's where Mount Carmel is. All right, everybody see it? Everybody with me? So where does he go? He goes to Mount Horeb, which is the same name of the mount that we know is a different name, Mount Sinai. Now, what happened at Mount Sinai? Well, it's the Ten Commandments. This is the Lord's mountain. This is the place where God showed up and met the people, but met Moses. Where is Mount Sinai? If you flip to the back of your Bibles and you see a map, you probably have a map somewhat like this. Where is Mount Sinai on this map? It's not. He literally went off the map. So, where is Mount Sinai? So I have here another picture. It's a little, so you see that little kind of piece up there? That's Mount Carmel. And then Mount Sinai is on this, what we call the Sinai Peninsula, is all the way down here. If I looked it up yesterday on Google Maps. So if you want to drive it this afternoon, on the street, on roads, it's 381 miles. 381 miles. Take you about 7.5 hours in a car on streets today. But what did he do? 40 days and 40 nights. He ran pretty much as far away as he could get. Just gone. Ran away. So we pick up the story then again in verse 9. So he gets there, so he entered a cave and he spent the night there. Suddenly, a word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" What are you doing here? And he replied, "Well, God, you see, I'm very zealous for the Lord, the God of armies. But the Israelites, not so much. They've abandoned your covenant. They've torn down your altars and killed your prophets with a sword. I alone am left. And they are looking for me to take my life." Then he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the Lord's presence." At that moment, the Lord passed by. A great and mighty wind was tearing at the mountains and scattering cliffs before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And now I'm going to shift from CSB. I want to go to NRSV. And after the earthquake, verse 12, after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, nothing. The sound of sheer silence. There's nothing. The sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in the mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Suddenly a voice came to him and said, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" Well, I've been pretty zealous. I've been doing the things correctly. But the Israelites, they're the problem. They've abandoned your covenant. They've torn down your altars. They've killed the prophets with the sword. And I am all alone. And they're looking. They're looking for me to take my life. Then the Lord said to him, Go and return by the way that you came, to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you will anoint Hazael, the king over Aram. You are to anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Sephath, and Abel Mohilah as the prophet in your place. Then Jehu will put to death whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death whoever escapes the sword of Jehu. But I will leave 7,000 in Israel, every knee that has not bowed to Baal and every mouth that has not kissed him. So here we come. Chapter 19, verse 12. In the CSB, and it's probably a little bit more what we are used to, after the earthquake there was fire. But the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire there was a voice, or if you grew up on King James, the still small voice. NRSV translates this a little bit more accurately. After the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire, a sound. A sound of sheer silence. After the fire. Just last chapter we read this verse, then the Lord's fire fell and consumed the burnt offering, the woods, the stone, and the dust. It licked up the water that was in its trench. When all the people saw it, they fell face down. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. You see, the people don't have a problem seeing God when He's falling from heaven as fire. But it's hard to see God when you're running for your life and there's nothing but silence. It's hard to see God in those moments when we think we are all alone and we don't know where God is. Maybe today what we need to hear is to be reminded that even in the silence that God is present. Maybe that's not even the right words to say even in the silence. Maybe the right way is in the very silence is God's presence. In the silence of our lives, when we cry out to God, how can we be reminded that in that silence God is present? He wasn't in the earthquake. He wasn't in the wind. He wasn't in the fire. He was in the place where no one thought he could be, in the silent. So what does it mean for God to be in the silence? Well, I think in order for us to answer this question, I think there's some other questions that we need to answer. I think the first piece of answering this question is answering the first question, which is what needs to quiet down in your life so that you can recognize God again? Back 20 years ago or so, we lived in California, and I decided to take on this task for my family and was shuttling back from Nashville to San Diego. The videotapes that my dad, we got our first camera, our VCR and camera, in 1982. That was a long time ago, and that was back when you had a camera that my dad would carry, and then the VCR was like separate, and then this is not a lie, the batteries lasted about 4 minutes. And so my dad created this battery pack that he wore around his waist where he could get like 30 minutes. It was impressive. And so my dad would video all of these things and would video us growing up and all of this stuff that we did. And so I decided to convert all of these videotapes into this newfangled thing called DVDs. It was very exciting. And so I created DVDs for my family. I made copies. And so for Christmas, I gave them the vast majority of those tapes. It was very laborious. It was very hard. The computers were very slow. It took very long to do all of this process. Now you can go on Amazon, and for about $120, you can buy this little device. You put an SD card in, and you plug a VCR, and you hit play and hit record, and you're done. It's amazing. And so we have this box in our basement that's full of VHS tapes. There's some there that we don't want to talk about because my wife might have been a really good clogger and there might be video evidence, but I wouldn't tell you all about that. But there's all kinds of there's her families, and then there's some of mine that I kept because I didn't have the time to do all of them. And so I've been going through them over the past few weeks, and then this week I went through and watched some, and there was this trip my dad took his Boy Scouts on. My dad's friend owned this pond, and I have a lot of memories at this pond, but we would go there, and so he was doing this survival trip. There's video of this trip, and I haven't watched it since, I don't know if I've ever seen it, and so this week I was going through it, and so we had cooked some fish and some bread on the fire. So there's this video of little John. It was the day that my dad gave me my first pocket knife, and so I have it hanging on my belt loop. I remember it very, very well. But I'm eating this bread, my dad's talking to me. But why I tell you all this is for this one statement. To hear my dad's voice, it just does something. Because it's been 37 years now, 36 years since I heard my dad's voice. Now I hear it in the videos. But you know how easy it is to forget someone's voice and what they sound like? But then I hear it. I hear it on that VHS tape, and it all comes back, doesn't it? It all comes back. And I think in this story, what's kind of caught me off guard is there is Elijah who he thinks he's all alone, but he's forgotten something. He's forgotten what the voice of God sounds like. And I think for us, we struggle with the exact same thing. We forget what the voice of God sounds like. Because we've put all of these other things in our lives that means that we don't recognize that voice anymore. Sometimes it's space that makes us forget the voice. Sometimes it's time that makes us forget the voice. But I think for a lot of us, it's just stuff that makes us forget the voice. So what needs to quiet down in your life so that you can recognize the voice again? What do we need to shut out? What do we need to put down? How much do we need to quit scrolling so that we again can hear the voice? The part of this story that we all know is true is that God was just as present in Mount Carmel as God was present at Mount Horeb. The question is that did Elijah take the time to hear him? God showed up in a mighty way 381 miles away. And now Elijah is alone and it's silent and he's afraid and forgets that there's a God who speaks everywhere. So the first part of this question is, what needs to quiet down in our lives so that we can recognize God again, or maybe a better way to say it is so that we can recognize his voice again? Another question that I think we need to answer is, can you trust that God is at work even when he feels silent? Silence is not the same thing as absence. God was present. And I think that day, as quiet as it was on that mountain, that quiet reassured Elijah of God's presence. But I don't know if we always trust God enough to believe that silence is a reassuring of his presence. Elijah's story reminds us that God doesn't always announce himself in dramatic ways. But God is still moving quietly and faithfully, even in the silence. And I think the third question that we need to answer today is, Can you slow down long enough to notice the God who still speaks in silence? What does it look like this week to be attentive to what God is doing? What does it look like to set aside time without music, without noise, to put our phones down, to say, Lord, I have forgotten what your voice sounds like. Lord, speak to me. Remind me. Remind me what your voice sounds like. The goal isn't to hear something, but to be reminded that the God who is present is already present. God is present in the answered prayers. God is present in the ways that we see him show up, but God is present even when we don't think he shows up. One of my all-time favorite little books, I mentioned it if you're on the email, by Barbara Brown Taylor. It's just called When God is Silent. One of the statements, and if it's probably been a while since I've used this quote, but it's a statement that lives in my brain all the time. I think about it way more than I want to admit. But Barbara Brown Taylor makes this statement in that book. Only an idol has to answer. God has more freedom than that. Only an idol has to answer. If we pray to an idol and they prayed to the idol for fire to come down and it never came down, that was their answer. But God sometimes in our lives, he's in the wind, sometimes he's in the earthquake, sometimes he's in the fire, but I think most of the time, he's in the silence. The silence of us waiting to hear him speak, the silence of waiting to hear him move. This morning, I hope that we are reminded that we live in a world that will keep shouting for your attention. But we serve a living God who waits in the sheer silence. Will we have the courage to stop, to listen, and to find him there? Part of what I love about this little story and that stands out to me is that in the midst of it, he tells him after this happens, when Elijah heard it, which he heard the silence, he wrapped his face in a mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. For us to go out, to stand at the entrance of the cave, to know that God is speaking, that God is here. Today, as we close, I just want to invite you. John's going to come and sing a song that many of us know very well. But a reminder that God is present. A reminder that God is with us. A reminder that we are praying to a God that so many times is in the silence. Today, if you would like to pray with a pastor, Pastor James will be right down at this altar. He would love the opportunity to pray with you. Today, if you would like to be anointed for healing for any reason, spiritual, emotional, physical, I would love the opportunity to pray with you right down at this altar. But there might be some others of us that just need to come and find a silent place. Maybe tell God, God, I haven't heard you in a while. Lord, I confess, sometimes I don't know what your voice sounds like. Lord, speak to me. Remind me of who you are. Let us stand today as we sing.